welcome back to this week's paper review. I think I'll actually still be in Malta when you guys are watching this, and Fitz won't be. So, just that's nice to know. This week's paper is on the fabled marijuana, weed,
devil's lettuce,
cannabis, it's wacky tobacco, blunts, what else? Spliffs, dope. So
smack.
So previously we did one on marijuana before. It was an individual study. Again, it kind of had, similar to the active and passive recovery stuff, actually in the marijuana's case, it had negative impacts on aerobic fitness. So today we came across one which was a meta-analysis. So in general, when you're looking at like results from scientific studies, you're looking for a consensus, you're looking for repeatability, and you're looking for basically more things pointing in one direction. And the more things that say the same thing, the more weight you get behind an argument. So I think most people realize that. So individual studies are useful. Individual studies backed up by a prior chain of events kind of coming to this conclusion are very, very useful as well. If we get something very left field out of nowhere, and we get this
out of nowhere,
we get this individual single case study or pilot study on maybe one or two people, it's useful to see, but in general it's kind of like, okay, that means something, but as of right now we can't make a huge statement from that. Now, I don't subscribe to the idea that one data point tells you nothing. That's definitely not true. One is certainly more than none. But in general, meta-analysis or case reviews or case compilations are certainly more useful. So this one we come across is coming from New South Wales.
Just on this point, this is one of the big misnomers that's out there at the moment, because loads of people are like evidence-based, research-driven. Rogan loves this like fully randomized control trial with placebo groups, right? That in terms of science and what's good science, that's not the best science to get your results from. Your best science would be a systematic review or a meta-analysis of a few hundred randomized control trials.
Yeah.
And that's what gold standard in research is, not a placebo-controlled or randomized control trial, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. You want a combination of multiple different studies in reality, in most scenarios, to put some weight in. Now, obviously, in certain things, like one where if you're like deloading increases people's 1RMs after weeks deload, like we know that in practicality. So in those cases, you get a well-designed study like that, and when it's kind of things that are well known, then you're kind of like, okay, so this is confirming what we already know in some regards. But obviously, things are in a lot more detail than that, and things are a lot more nuanced. So this one is just by one author, Michael C. Kennedy. He's in the Department of Clinical Pharmacology and Toxicology, St. Vincent's Hospital, Darlinghurst, NSW, New South Wales. So it is titled Cannabis, Exercise Performance and Sport, a Systematic Review. What are you drinking?
Pepsi Max.
Of course, lovely. So methods today are very, very short, right? Fitz is going to give kind of the highlights of the results of these, but the methods, obviously, for anyone who knows who's done a meta-analysis, maybe in university or something like that. A search was conducted using PubMed, Medline, Embase, searching for cannabis, marijuana, cannabinoids, and THC in sport and exercise science, as well as cross-references from journals and a personal collection of reprints. Interestingly, and I do like, and I understand where he's coming from. So he's obviously a doctor and he's involved in medicine, and he's made a point to say that there was numerous review articles, opinion pieces, policy statements by sporting bodies and regulatory agencies were excluded. So I love language in science where you can say something so subtly, but when you're used to reading it, it's the equivalent of calling someone a dumb cunt. You're calling someone a dumb cunt, like when you say certain things, So he's taking quite a little jab at the recent rise in marijuana or CBD related products. He's really saying this is the science we're looking at, and we looked at the science here rather than people's opinions or extreme anecdotal evidence.
Actually, I think if you want to read a dirty little jab, read the first line of results.
Mainstream journals frequently contained reviews, personal opinions and policy statements about cannabis and sports. In spite of large number of publications relating to the cardiovascular and respiratory effects of cannabinoids, there were 15 research papers included, published conference abstracts that related specifically to or reported on the interaction of cannabinoids and exercise.
Little jabby one. Right, so as Gar said, 15 studies reported on cannabis and exercise. I'm just going to run through now to give you an idea what the studies were, and then we'll pick like 4 or 5 of them and look at the interaction between the drug use and the performance outcomes afterwards. So, 2 involved patients with proven coronary disease, 1 involved exercise-induced asthma, 4 used submaximal exercise and a measure of strength, 3 used maximal exercise, 1 compared THC to Synhexal, which is a synthetic cannabis product used for weaning people off of addiction, most commonly alcohol addiction. And that was using a measure of strength for the study. 2 studies, exercise as an adjunct to drug rehab. 2 measured the effectiveness of exercise on plasma concentrations of THC. The most important piece to note here is when you're looking at meta-analyses, in this case, it's not a meta-analysis, it's a systematic review. It's really important to note that the range of your sources can often be quite wide. We'd often think if you're looking at exercise and cannabis use, that it would be all of these placebo-controlled, randomized studies, and they all look at just marijuana and they look at just exercise and usually one modality of exercise. In fact, the real strength of a systematic review is how broad the range goes. So you've everything here from an enforcement piece where it's looking at the effect exercise might have on THC levels in the plasma. So that's nothing really to do with performance. That's to do with seeing like bleed out or seeing concentration times and half-life during exercising groups. Then you have like the use of Synhexal as an adjunct to an addictive substance. That's obviously nothing to do with sports, but the fact they're measuring strength here means we can draw their data from it. We also have multiple ones where it's maximal and submaximal, which is kind of what we would have expected. And then we have some clinical stuff where we're looking at exercise-induced asthma. The real strength of this not only is the fact that we get all the different groups and all these different groups are looking at different things, but we also get a huge number of different expertise in here. So you get it going from the sports performance world through to the psychology and performance psychology world, through all the way to kind of clinical medicine and their level of expertise. So we're looking at similar values, similar measures all the way along, but it's a very, very different group of people looking at it every time. So let's take a look at some different examples. So in the groups where they compared work capacity and strength, we see THC causes a fall in peak work capacity. Overall, the work capacity was lower in the THC group than it would be in the control groups. And in those cases, so when they compared work capacity and hand grip strength, there is no change in hand grip strength, and that's something we might talk about in the discussion later on. Next study looked at 17 males. There was a combination of THC and that Synhexal, the synthetic product we talked about. Weakness was clearly demonstrated on the finger ergograph. We might just put a picture of a finger ergograph in here. It's a weird capture or torture looking device. So clearly demonstrated, so that's significant findings on that. Funny piece from this study is that 1 became completely uncooperative, had to leave. So I think they started off with 18 and finished with 17, something like that. A study by Avakian et al. Looked at basically cardiovascular fitness, and it looked at the effect intake of a marijuana product, or THC specifically, the effect that might have on heart rate and how we can control our heart rate during exercise. In this study, they look at it's quite an interesting value, but it's really poignant in this kind of research, and it's a double product value, so peak double product, it's blood pressure by heart rate. And what they found was that heart rate stayed elevated for longer following exercise, and overall this peak double product was higher over the course of the entire exercise intervention. So obviously the body is undergoing some sort of stress. A common stress response is elevation of blood pressure and heart rate, and this is not a good thing for sports performance. Another thing from that study is all THC considered exercise harder. So usually when people quote this, you'll often hear jiu-jitsu people saying they like rolling when they're like a bit buzzed, and because they find it easier to move, they find it easier to get into positions. In this, rate of perceived exertion was higher across all exercise interventions when THC was intaken. And then the last thing, we had decreased heart rate reaction during acceleration phases. This is an acceleration phase of the intervention itself. It's not specifically a sprinting acceleration, but when you get an increase in intensity, they'd refer to that as an acceleration phase. So you have a dampening of a heart rate response, which obviously anybody who'd be on beta blockers or blood pressure medication would understand how inhibitory that is to you just living your normal life, like not being able to raise your heart rate when needed. It's certainly highly inhibitory in a sports performance context. Last paper then, Shapiro et al. This is looking at prolonged exercise bouts at medium and high intensities, and we get a decreased exercise tolerance by 5.5 minutes over the course of, I think it was like a 15 to 20 minute.
That's a lot.
Yeah, like it's a huge finding, and these are just some parts from the results section of this paper, but this is the beauty of the systematic review. Not to, like, we don't care, like we honestly don't care whatever you do with your training. We do think this is quite important though, because we deal with a lot of athletes in a lot of different modalities of training, and this is a question that comes up all the time. We've talked about it on the channel before, and we get,
well, no, do you know what? I think a lot of people are like, damn.
Yeah, like, a lot of people are just disappointed because they like doing it and they like training.
Like, I think I have kind of two main things I want to talk about in this, or kind of want to bring up, right? So one is the large increase in people who do smoke weed and vape, using THC products. And again, it's like Fitz said, it's not that we care, but we just care what affects our athletes' performances. And of course, then for our YouTube and our podcast, it's how do we help you with your performance most. And if something is done by a huge cohort of people, and there's a good chance a lot of people watching this do use marijuana regularly. We also see with people with marijuana as well, just from personal experience, and I know there's some statistics, but usually when people use it, they use it quite frequently, like so almost to a weekly basis. We do see some people then like on a daily basis in use of marijuana. That was one of the ones we had from earlier this year. And I think it's just noted that it's just not good performance in almost any setting from the looks of it. So I actually want to read a little bit of the conclusion here. So I think it's just worth kind of looking at how he synopsized what the results are. So a small number of scientific studies all show cannabis decreases aerobic performance, has no effect on it. There are no theoretical reasons to believe it could increase strength or endurance. It may impair abilities in extreme situations. There are claims that the psychological effects may have a calming effect for events, but this has not been confirmed or disproved in the clinical trial. Now, kind of one I want to talk about as well is, apart from one case report of it used in the field reduction of a dislocated shoulder, there is no data to support claims that it possesses special analgesic or muscle relaxing properties for sports people. So this is my main concern here is, so one, we have the fact that marijuana just doesn't help performance and negatively affect your performance. So if you as an individual do use that, then it's very, very important that you're aware of that. And then when you're looking at all the variables affecting your performance, you can go, shit, I do smoke a lot of weed, or geez, my Saturday runs are really bad when I just sit at home on Friday smoking weed, So it's good for you as a person to look at the variables as an athlete and see what's affecting it. The other one, though, is the main thing that concerns me, is the amount of CBD products who are pushing themselves, who are sponsoring very high profile athletes, and people talking about how it really helps their joints, how it really helps their sleep. The joint one in particular is a huge one, reducing inflammation. So in this case, there doesn't seem to be any evidence. He wasn't able to find any evidence, and we looked as well before this. Was there any evidence that, for example, CBD products have any effect on, painkiller or similar effects to painkillers? Do they reduce inflammation? Now, people love anecdotal evidence. For example, there was one where they gave people's sleep patterns, so they were using, I think it was a CBD product. The people had reported poor sleep. They gave them the CBD product. Most people's sleep improved, but they followed up several months later, and then they had basically returned to baseline. So essentially what you could probably assume from that is you're getting a placebo effect from the CBD products. So obviously THC products or cannabis acts as a sedative essentially, so it's unlikely you may or may not be getting good quality sleep. But my main one is people's use of their hard-earned money. People spending money on products. You see, I don't know if we probably should name any of them, but you see loads of athletes, big in the CrossFit realm of things, where you see loads of these athletes are sponsored by CBD products. They're like recover faster, sleep better, think clearer with weed or the CBD, or you have your creams and you have your drops, and you see these same athletes, kind of like it's. I don't like it. I really don't like it, because they talk about how useful it is for them, and the problem with anecdotal evidence is there is in some ways a cultural malaise where you can't really rebuttal someone's anecdotal evidence, because it's how they feel personally. It helps me perform better. So
that's just me.
Yeah, that's just me. So there is really zero evidence at the moment. I don't know if there's any. I'm sure there has to be some kind of clinical trials going on, or some kind of interventional study with CBD, or someone has to be looking at it. It's just too big at the moment not to be.
We're yet to find a single useful one, though.
Yeah, but I haven't seen any. There's very, very little of them. Harvard, they do some kind of like cultural review. Sometimes I see one from last year, and they were looking at CBD, and they were saying in no scenario, no one has in any way proved that it's useful for a painkiller or like effects. So that'll be my main concern for people watching is THC or any marijuana products. How does it affect your performance? To understand that it's probably a negative variable. And then the other one is just be really wary of the CBD products in terms of, does it actually do anything for you? Are you wasting money? And supporting companies who are making extraordinary claims but backing them up with zero evidence.
Yeah, on the zero evidence point, and I'm not going to harp on to this for too long.
You brought your harp.
Bang, bang. But you commonly see variables being measured, right? So in one of the studies here, they talk about work capacity and strength. I mentioned it earlier where peak work capacity was lower overall, but we had no change in hand grip strength, right? This is just as a point of note. If you're looking at these studies, or you're looking at any studies, and you start looking at the measurement tools they're using, you need to be super conscious of how sensitive that measurement tool is and how sensitive it is in application. So when you look at the effect on strength is about so much more than just an isometric hold or the amount of force you can produce over the course of 5 or 6 or 10 seconds, which is what a hand grip strength measure is. I would really be very interested to note if it was a skilled test of strength. Mm-hmm. So even just something more skilled than an isometric hold against a hand grip ergometer or whatever it was. If it was something along the lines of like a multi-joint compound movement, I guarantee you the use of a psychoactive substance could not help in that case.
Yeah, as you said, there's no reason to expect that.
There's no reason, like you're inhibiting and dampening your system rather than in any way enabling it to perform better. So it is really important when you look at these, like you can read the abstract of that paper in particular, and it says use of THC during sport has no effect on strength. It has no effect on that kind of strength, which for most of us, isometric hold of a hand grip ergometer is almost useless. Any sporting, possibly if you were a climber and part of your sport was to stay on the wall for a very long time, then that's like one aspect of it, but you wouldn't be able to concentrate and get your hand to the correct holds, or you wouldn't have the same level of work capacity or peak work capacity to actually get up the wall. So do be really conscious of that, of when you see certain measures being used. Hand grip ergometers are really common because they're so easy, they're really low skill, and they're really cheap, and you can get a fairly good degree of accuracy with them. But in this case, it means basically fuck all.
My kind of concern for marijuana as well is that, from an anecdotal point of view, so kind of unrelated to the results and performance, mostly what we see with people at the moment, even in terms of athletic performance, is they are medicating with marijuana instead of kind of supplementing with it, I suppose would be the best phrase to use. So rather than having good sleep hygiene, good training load parameters, managing training load effectively, from nutrition, prehab and rehab correctly, they are trying to compensate by using something like this. So people have poor sleep hygiene, but marijuana helps them sleep effectively, so it covers up the lack of, for example, or the exposure to light, a lot of blue light, for example, not getting up early, not going to bed at wake to sleep at times. They're kind of covering up things, I think, and that's kind of something you see from a personal point of view, is we see people using marijuana as a medication and medicating themselves and really trying to cover up other things, rather than having it as a nice little adjunct to the rest of their life, like maybe drinking alcohol once a month or something. They're really fucking ramming a round peg into every other hole in their little toy box, you know. So that would be my main concern for people watching. I don't use weed. I don't like weed. It's thoroughly unenjoyable. But I am more than happy for people to use it. But I would just be concerned for people in terms of just even looking at athletic performance. Like, are you using it for the right reasons? And just be aware of what it might be doing.
If you're sick of jamming round pegs into all your toy box holes and you want some help with your training, you can go onto our website and look at consultations. Just click on that box and you can come and chat to myself and Owen for a nominal fee. Thank you.